Good morning, everyone. We have with us Carol and Paul of APAC Assistance, and we also have Anisara joining in. We are discussing on bomb blasts which happened in Colombo and a couple of other cities in Sri Lanka on April the 21st on Sunday. In the blast, 3 churches and 4 high-profile hotels were targeted, and immediately there was no claims for responsibility. Paul, would you like to join in and add?
Oh, look, firstly, hi, Ploy, and good morning to you, Bhargav. Look, firstly, the fact that major hotels, Shangri-La Hotels, Cinnamon, Kingsbury, Tropical Inn, as well as major churches were all attacked, says this was a very committed, well-planned, well-orchestrated, with months, if not years, in the planning. So I think we need to be very careful about drawing conclusions that this is in retaliation of Christchurch. What we can conclude is security preparations, intelligence preparations, interaction between the departments is a massive failure. I correlate this to Indonesia in the late 90s when terrorism took hold and all the hotels didn't want to have security, and then they suddenly all wanted to have it because they realised that hotels with good security were full, as opposed to they didn't want to spend money on something called security. So before we get you to overview the events and this current situation, I think, Carol, I'd like to just hear your view if you see any parallels between this and incidences in recent decades in Manila in relation to terrorist groups and their activities.
What I can say is that it appears to be a pattern of Islamic-based terrorist attacks. Islamists usually target places of worship, including Catholics and Christians, and foreign, particularly Western interests. So it is logical to assume that this is an Islamist terror attack. In the first place, there are claims of responsibility for it by the IS, and at the same time, the primary suspects are Islamist organizations. So I think it goes into the pattern of Islamist attacks, not just in the Philippines, but across the globe, targeting places of worship, particular religious groups, possibly minorities, and Western or foreign interests.
So, Carol, that's obviously a logical conclusion. Bhargav, earlier on in the post-tragedy commentary, some intelligence agencies were asking questions of radical Buddhist elements. Do you think that theory still holds any credence, or do you think we can dispel that now?
I do not think we can completely dismiss the theory entirely, primarily because there is an element of suspicion on why the intelligence reports were suppressed, and was it in coordination with the Buddhist groups who have previously targeted churches and places of worship for other religions, including Muslims. So apart from that, there is a counter to that theory as well. The radical Buddhists have usually targeted places in a mob-like situation. They have brought in mobs to attack churches. They are brazen attacks. They are not, hit-and-run kind of attacks using suicide bombers. And given the kind of coordination which was seen on Sunday, Buddhists do not have, at least they have not previously had such international network to acquire detonators and high-level explosives. At the same time, BBS, that is Bodu Balasena, the frontline right-wing Buddhist organization, had piggybacked off of Sri Lanka Freedom Party headed by Rajapaksa. This was immediately after the civil war, which ended in 2009. So we can see that it was politically driven and not entirely rooted in the radical ideology of Buddhists. So yes, we cannot dispel the theory, but at the same time, there are counters which pose credible questions to that theory.
Whilst it's unlikely, I do think something of great interest is the recent power struggle, which nearly brought Sri Lanka to a long-term standstill. The parliament stopped functioning. There was a tit for tat between the president, the parliament, I beg your pardon, the prime minister. Could that partially explain why the intelligence information did not flow? Clearly, there's serious lack of government performance at the parliamentary level. There seems to be a massive issue with the interoperability between the various security forces and intelligence agencies, and that's not something that's rare amongst any nation, but one that's had such a long-standing domestic war with such a advanced operational unit such as the Tamil Tigers. Can we draw more conclusions about the security paradigm and what it means to companies operating in Sri Lanka from the fact that not only did the intelligence agencies fail recently, Parliament failed to be productive, and also the issue between the Prime Minister and the President, has that potentially contributed to the death of 400 people or well over 300 people as the country plays domestic politics and everyone's worried about their own individual power base rather than what's good for the country or the tourists and nations and investors that the country's hosting? Bhargav?
The intelligence failure which led to the attacks on Sunday does reflect on the lack of efficiency and coordination within the security establishment headed by the president. The security establishment directly reports to the president and not to the prime minister. Yes, the domestic politics and the disruptions caused last year may have directly influenced the efficiency of the security establishment, who may have been preoccupied with dealing with the political dissidents or spying on themselves. So that could be one narrative which could be established. But it is hard to say whether they were compromised or was there an internal conspiracy to keep president and the prime minister out so that they can achieve the political ends.
And Bhargav, looking as we move forward, and Carol, after Bhargav chats, you might like to chime in, but the president has since come out and said he did not receive these intelligence warnings, that despite the security forces and presumably the police reporting directly to him. Who's domestically got the most to lose from this incident? And therefore, okay, it's clear Islamic State or a similar organisation has offered expertise, resources, planning, coordination, but we know it's affiliated with domestic terrorism groups to carry out such an incident. That's also been stated by Sri Lanka's own intelligence and India's intelligence agencies. But could we not logically conclude that a lot of the internal issues with the politics and different religions and different historical groups and the factions in Sri Lanka, and these are obviously behind the political walls as well, there could be some extremely unhealthy relationships with people in very high places in Sri Lanka? Bhargav?
Paul, in terms of political equations, as far as the security establishment is concerned, president has most to lose because he's in charge of the security and he's the executive head of the state. So as far as the political equation is concerned, Ranil Wickremesinghe, who opposed the prime minister or was dismissed last year, may gain political ground by pointing fingers at the security establishment, which obviously is headed by the president. So yes, there is a political equation there, but at the same time, we need to note that the the political landscape has changed a lot since the end of Civil War. During the Civil War, there was a there was a sense of securitization. That means the political landscape and the security establishment were alert against one enemy, that is LTTE. And since the military defeat of LTTE, now who is the actual enemy? Who is the visible enemy? So the defeat of LTT seems to have brought in a sense of complacency within the security establishment, and thus the political turmoil, because they are fighting within themselves to gain most power with their booming tourism economy and several aspects of the economy being showing positive signs of growth. So yes, so politically, president seems to be losing while Ranil Wickremesinghe gains as far as the elections are concerned, due later this year.
Well, this is very interesting because, you know, if we look to solve crimes, we look at who has the greatest gain and the greatest motivation. Hence my query and indeed concerns about, as you mentioned, before everyone was focused on the Tamil Tigers, that war was finished, but those ex-combatants were extremely highly skilled. The Tamil Tigers pioneered suicide bombings. They ran a war, being in the greatest of minorities. They batted way above their weight for decades. Those skill sets are still there. Indeed, those skill sets are being imported into southern Thailand, into Philippines, into Indonesia, because of the expertise they had operationally. It is of grave concern that the politics and the security and situation here, I can't help but think this is more than an Islamic State operation. This is an Islamic State infiltrate and utilise operation that is not only using a domestic terrorism group, but it's also utilising the political weaknesses and the lack of loyalty inherent in Sri Lankan, particularly the Sri Lankan political hierarchy. It is of equal concern that Sri Lanka, you know, has availability to such skill sets held by the Tamil Tigers. It has a very porous border, and it clearly has, regardless of how they will pitch this, and it's good to see them admitting failures, but it has had failures at every level. At the security of international hotels has clearly failed. Hotels that have constantly been hit across Asia, you know, the Marriotts, now the Shangri-La. There's been, you know, multiple incidents, dozens of incidents affecting international hotels, and the international hotels and the owners of the buildings that they rent continue to fail and then travel the world talking about how they fix their security problems rather than prevent fatal fatality, multiple fatalities. They tend to fix everything after the fact. So this is of great concern. Carol, interested to hear your take on why international hotels constantly get hit, but they don't seem to invest in security. We know there's a phenomenon in security called target deflection, and what that means is if I'm an element, any element, could be right wing, could be Islamic terrorism, could be Buddhism terrorists. If we try to seek a target, and Carol outlined, Western brands, Western interests, in this case, churches and Christchurch mosques. If there's very good physical security and intelligence, Singapore would be a good example so far. God touch wood 3 times with me. There hasn't been terrorism incidents because they have a good intel, they have good coordination, they have reasonable but not great physical security. But overall, their security and their intelligence processes are layered. However, target deflection states that if I want to hit and meet my objectives of my hit. And location X, Jakarta, for example, now is very well hardened after 20 years of terrorism. Even the major hotels, such as the Marriott and Ritz-Carlton, fixed their gaping holes and then hero worship their security leader, rather than probably accept culpability for stuff they should have done prior to the incident that was clear and obvious there was a need. But how now target deflection is they look for a weaker target. So Kuala Lumpur, Sri Lanka have very poor, non-existent or very cursory hotel security. Philippines has appalling security, as highlighted in most major hotels, still utilising a magic wooden stick to do what X-ray machines and metal detectors should do. Carol, what's your theory on why hotels and other than the government agencies that have no culpability and unlimited budgets, why doesn't the international hotel community and indeed many Western companies invest in security? It's clear and obvious where the terrorism groups are empty, target deflections are known principle. Is it just a lack of security? Is it a lack of resourcing? Is it a lack of, we talk about intelligence agencies and government figures and security agencies in Philippines not talking, but is it as simple as the security guys within organisations don't have the commercial acumen to convince their management? Is it arrogance within the management? Is it short-sightedness? Is it, we can get away with that, so don't worry about risking people's lives,
Okay. Well, Paul, it's true that the hotels are targeted precisely because they are considered as, not only because they represent foreign interests, because they presumably they host a lot of foreigners inside their hotels. Hotels are targeted precisely because they are easy to target. That's why they are called soft targets. It's very hard for terrorists to infiltrate, for example, a military camp, because security measures are very heavy in such facilities. But hotels are presumed to maintain less stringent security measures. That's why they are targeted. Airports are also less targeted by less capable uh, terrorist plotters, because it's difficult to get inside airports and plant bombs. So, hotels, tourist destinations, uh, uh, beaches frequented by tourists, these are all soft targets, meaning to say it's easy for terrorists to infiltrate those places and plant bombs or blow up bombs using suicide bombers. I'd also like to comment on why there seemed to be a lack of communication between the Prime Minister and the intelligence agencies. Well, I'm offering a different opinion than what I am reading now in media. It's also possible that there was really no intention to keep the Prime Minister or the President out of the loop. It's maybe because they received the intel information from the foreign embassies only recently. Maybe the Sri Lankan intelligence agencies are still waiting to validate their info before they present something as serious as that to the president or the prime minister. Maybe they're just waiting to validate those information, but well, as it turned out, they waited too long. So it's also possible that there was really no political conspiracy or no real intention to make the government look bad.
Yes, however, the flip side of that, Carol, is whilst it may not have been intentional and whilst it was not an internal conspiracy, it does show some abject incompetency and some extreme operational and failure of any lack of interoperability between the groups. So great, no conspiracy. Bad, there was no action, especially given the time frames that they'd sat on. Imminent warnings. Imminent warnings means something could happen in the next 24 to 48 hours. To sit on stuff for, I think it was 11 days, was it, Bargo?
Yes, Paul. The inaction is inexplicable in this case because the first warning came on the 11th of April, and an advisory was issued almost immediately by the chief of police in Colombo. So after that, we saw no security measures being deployed or no major operation being conducted in Colombo or nationwide. And several other alerts were passed with a few hours or day before the blast actually took place. Other than this, uh, the intelligence operation in Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Sri Lanka are pretty well coordinated with the intelligence agencies in Sri Lanka. So, NIA, that is National Investigations Agency, and Research and Analysis Wing of India, are very much in coordination with Sri Lanka, and that's precisely why they were able to communicate freely and pass on the intelligence. So, if that's the case, uh, no action being taken, I do not see a plausible explanation for that, conspiracy or not. I would say it's downright incompetence and complacency.
Yes, look, and I'd agree that my greatest concern is Western companies, particularly high-profile ones such as, the Shangri-La, but also companies are sending their people in. There's mechanics and expertise and sales and investment teams travelling throughout Sri Lanka, right up into the old war zone area of Jaffna. The fact that these incidents spread from the west coast in Colombo and surrounding suburbs right out to the eastern city, it's a great concern that, in that amount of time, the intelligence agencies, the security should have not only done a warning in Colombo, but one would have hoped that they had close affiliations with the embassies, with private company groups, with associations, security associations, chambers of commerce, and said, look, these are real incredible. Would have given companies a chance to bolster, more security, set up, walk through machines, increase perimeter security, both physical and patrolling, set up deterrence, place warning signs. But none of this seems to have happened. That's not just incompetency by the agencies, but companies operating in a risk paradigm like Sri Lanka not to have already done this. Particularly high-profile Western hotels, frankly, should know better. They have global security guys, regional security guys, but they either seem to be ignored or they themselves have limited experience. So it's a great concern. Bhargav, just on that, what kind of indicators should we be looking at now, or Carol, what kind of indicators are going to, show changes in the security paradigm? Are we mainly now looking at political response? Are we looking at, further incidents? I believe there was a truck and a van identified that was carrying explosives. I think there was a motorbike bomb discovered. Now, on the immediately short term, we're obviously looking at how much more was planned in this incident, so this could have been much worse. But what political events are going to indicate an either positive or a negative trend to the security paradigm now in Sri Lanka? And what should Western companies, obviously they need to do vulnerability assessments, security risk assessments like, 6 months ago, but if they haven't done it, they need to do it now. By not doing it, you're not hiding from culpability, you're amplifying stupidity. But what should Western companies be looking at now in terms of indicators on an increasing risk or a decreasing risk environment to their people and assets within Sri Lanka?
First of all, what I can say at present about the security situation in Sri Lanka is that the threat is still ongoing. For one thing, more bombs are being discovered, and some of these bombs are fitted into vehicles. Some are found elsewhere in some critical facility. So the next bombs may not necessarily be carried out by suicide bombers anymore, but by bombs fitted into something, a vehicle, or placed somewhere in a facility like airports, hotels. Another indicator is that suspects are presumed to be still at large. So far, there were already dozens of potential suspects or persons of interest arrested by the police. But even the Sri Lankan police cannot say whether they have all the suspects under their custody already. There are even reports that the NTJ leader, it's not well, there were initial reports that one of the suicide bombers who perished in the incident was Saharan himself, but authorities could not confirm that. So NTJ leaders, the ringleaders, might still be at large. So while there is still ongoing manhunt operation, there is still the assumption that there are people out there, potential terrorists, who remain capable or might be already fitted with bombs to carry out further attacks.
And Carol, what about on the political side of it? You know, would we be looking at things like ongoing bickering of a childlike nature between the president and prime minister? Would we be looking at racial or communal disharmony? What elements would, at the political level, should we be monitoring for, you know, improved interoperability for one, or deteriorating a situation? My great concern is I look at the history of violence in countries, Cambodia, even more notably Indonesia, where there's been a history of violence, violence tends to repeat. One of the greatest books I've ever read is The Roots of Violence in Indonesia. It lays out that violence manifests itself, plants itself in the psyche, and then repeats itself. But Sri Lanka seems to be going down the same path. It's had a horrendously bloody war. It's led to the isolation of many groups. What kind of political indicators should we be looking at that the situation and the ability for interoperability and improved security is just not developing?
Well, I don't know if there is an inclination among the leaders of Sri Lanka right now to cash in on the situation for personal political benefit. I don't see them, for example, attacking each other right now publicly, at least not publicly, precisely because they want to uh, uh, add further fuel to an already tense situation. So that's a positive that they are trying to contain the tension that is ongoing in Sri Lanka. But as soon as a particular political bloc starts making statements that are considered to be incendiary, then a power struggle erupts from that statement, then perhaps perhaps we could attach a political significance to it. But right now, I really don't see that any group right now is ready to politically cash in on the situation. They're just concerned right now about controlling the mayhem.
The greater concern, okay, right now, I mean, anyone with any level of sensibility would be doing as you've described. But the real issue is when this event is behind us, 3 to 6 months from now,
Mhm.
are we likely to see? If we look at how long it has been since the event, has there been any indicators that they're working on declaring how they're going to fix their intelligence and their interoperability issues, their command and control lines, who has responsibilities for security, what are the procedures? You know, if we look at New Zealand post-event Christchurch, there was great leadership shown in a positive sense, both in an emotional support sense, but also in a we need to change our gun laws. That's our real obvious issue. New Zealand has one of the best interoperability performance criteria between police, military, politicians, command and control, strategic, interoperability of response and utilisation of intelligence. But they picked a problem, and that was availability of weapons that could get into the wrong hands, and they fixed it very quickly. Are we seeing any positive signs other than silence and not making any faux pas? Are we seeing any issues that may positively influence the security paradigm? I know if I have a hotel now or a major factory, I'm taking serious this security issue. I'm saying I need to take this into my own hands. Clearly the government and their security efforts and their intelligence efforts are bumbling and incompetent at best. At worst, there could be elements that are complicit for political purposes. So my question isn't what they're doing now, Carol. It's are we likely to see a positive or a negative trend in the security paradigm in 3 to 6 months now? What level of preparations are going to be put in place? Or are we going to see a quiet period and a return to internal political bungling? 2 weeks after the event, New Zealand was a different place. It had changed the laws within Parliament. What's happened in Sri Lanka of a positive nature since the event?
Okay. The latest indicator I saw now is the immediate sacking of top-level police and the intelligence security officials. So presumably there will be massive revamps in the security sector, and from there, when new leaders, when new officials take over the vacated posts, they are going to issue certain. They are going to implement reforms within the intelligence community and the security sector, and also they are going to beef up security measures at critical infrastructures and areas. Like they could order more heavier security or heavier police presence in tourist destinations, around hotels, airports, terminals, transport hubs, cafes, and any religious minority communities, and any places frequented by foreigners.
But that's presumably, so they're indicators that we'd like to look at. There could be a counter-argument, Bhargav, that these are politicians blaming the heads of security for their own lacks of communication, their own lack of resourcing. So we'll see whether this is a deflect the blame from political to operational elements, or whether it's actually a change in the culture, because unless the top management anywhere supports and encourages, i.e. resources, plans, listens, engages, accepts advice, then really this could be just a excuse my French, and us covering a process, Carol.
Well, it's supposed to, after the event, it's supposed to heighten the sense of urgency among hotel owners and embassies to beef up their own security arrangements, to review their security measures. That means this is a game changer. The security situation is not as safe as it used to be. So
well, how long is it? Sorry, how long is it since the war ended, Bhargav?
It's been exactly 10 years. War ended in 2009.
Yes. So we've had 10 years of relative calm, but we have seen a deteriorating situation in the political unity. As you said, everybody used to be focused on the LTTE, the Tamil Tigers and their political elements. Now they seem to be turning upon themselves. Are they turning on themselves because of communal and religious differences, or is it about power?
Since the end of civil war, there have been 2 or 3 major beacons which has gone off. Especially after the blast, we see the Islamist groups have set off a beacon for the security establishment, who had sidelined them as a non-threat, primarily because the Muslim community, without whose support spot, these groups cannot operate if we go by the traditional uh, treatise of counterinsurgency. They were engaged primarily in trade and business, and not in. They were not really in the forefront of politics, or socially they were not really vocal. Not until they were targeted by the nationalist Buddhists, right? So apart from this, the positive element after the blast would be that uh, the security establishment will get out of the glare of victory against the LTTE. So there could be a sense of arrogance within the security community of defeating probably the the most hardened insurgent groups, that is LTTE. So probably this will bring them out of that glare and gear them up for a new enemy which operates in a completely different manner compared to a traditional insurgent group like LTTE.
So really, one of the major problems is within. It's the lack of coordination and capability, lack of foresight, lack of strategic planning, lacking of unity within. Okay, yes, the enemy exists of terrorism, but by having so many porous holes allowing it to enter, uh, you can't really change the enemy when you don't know who they are or where they are, or have a very limited view on them. But really, the major issues to change the security paradigm in Sri Lanka lie within the walls of politics, public service, and security forces. Bhargav, you know, what do you expect to occur? 30 to 90 to 180 days now. Do you expect a coordinated verbal response, laying out how they're going to fix these porous holes, or you don't think they're going to have a culture that lays it on the table, says these are our failures, this is what we need to fix, and here's our plan to fix it? I'm not that familiar with the cultures and thought patterns in Sri Lanka. What would you predict shall occur from here?
The immediate fallout in the next 3 to 6 months is political and social. Uh, Politically, there are already calls to ban burqa, which again will have social implications, further worsening the situation in eastern provinces dominated by the Muslim communities. So that will be the immediate fallout. So we can expect, ta- mosques to be targeted by the nationalist Buddhists or dissident groups, or you can further see, radicalization pushed to an extreme by groups like NTJ if they are not properly controlled and suppressed by the security establishment. And security establishment itself may not really see a major change within a period of 3 to 6 months. It may take longer, given the since we have seen the efficiency, of having dealt with LTT for 3 long decades. If they were hardened and efficient enough, they would have, controlled the situation much earlier. They had to wait for Chinese help and the Chinese arms dumped in Sri Lanka for economic benefits for them to control LTTE. So you can imagine uh, how agile they are as an organization.
Yes, and I think they're probably a reflection of their own political leadership. Well, look, I think that's probably given a good roundup for today. Carol Ambrosio, our head analyst based in the Philippines, former advisor of the National Security Advisor of the Philippines, Bhargav Reddy based in India, Arasara Wudiket based in Thailand. Thank you very much for this morning and for your insights. And let's please get this out in the public domain to help companies prepare their security. If anybody wants a copy of our assessment that we wrote post Sri Lanka event, you can email us at info@apacassistance.com if you need assistance with vulnerability assessments, security training in Sri Lanka or anywhere throughout the Asia Pacific. We have teams in East Asia Pacific and South Asia. So please do reach out at info@apacassistance.com. One closing comment from you, please, Bhargav.
Yes, the security situation is likely to deteriorate further, given the lack of efficiency and coordination within the government and the security establishment. So the companies need to alert their security personnel and improvise upon their current security measures. with limited or no support from the national establishment. And we would suggest avoid communally tense areas like in the north or the east of Sri Lanka, where groups like NTJ have their strongholds. We can see more security operations across the country, and possible encounters, armed encounters between Islamic State affiliated groups and the security forces.
Well, Carol, thank you. Bhargav, thank you. I'm checking out, and all the best. Cheerio. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.